The crystal champagne flute felt like a shard of ice in Alara Vance's hand, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the 100+ bodies packed into the Vance Ranch's grand ballroom. The air, thick with expensive perfume and aged whiskey, pressed in on her. She was 25, the sole heir to a legacy that was, unbeknownst to most, crumbling, and tonight she was being sold. To Alara and Preston! The roar of applause was deafening. Preston Hayes, her fiancé, raised his glass with a practiced, self-satisfied smile. He was a man built for boardrooms, not barns, all tailored suits and calculated ambition. The marriage was a merger, a lifeline for the Vance Ranch, which was hemorrhaging money faster than Silas Vance, Ilara's stern father, could admit. "My dear Ilara," Preston began, his voice smooth and utterly devoid of genuine emotion. "She is the most beautiful jewel in all of Montana, and soon she will be mine." Ellie, as the ranch hands knew her, forced a brittle smile. Her gaze drifted past the sea of silk and diamonds and landed on the one man who seemed utterly unaffected by the spectacle. Caleb Thorne, the ranch foreman, stood near the double doors, a shadow against the bright lights. His denim shirt was faded, his hands calloused and strong. He was the antithesis of every man in the room, raw, honest, and dangerous in a way that made Ellie's breath catch. His dark eyes, usually reserved and focused, met hers for a fleeting, charged second. In that look she saw a man who understood the true cost of the land, a man who saw the lie behind her smile. It was a silent, forbidden acknowledgement that sent a shiver down her spine. Then the world shattered. A young ranch hand, his face blackened with soot, burst through the doors, screaming over the music. "Fire! The main barn! It's gone up!" Chaos erupted. The guests surged toward the exits. Preston grabbed Ellie's arm. "Stay here, Ilara. We mustn't soil the optics." But Ellie was already pulling away. The main barn housed Legacy, the ranch's prize-breeding bull, worth more than Preston's entire investment. If Legacy died, the Vance Ranch was truly finished. She ran, tearing across the gravel drive. The night sky was stained a terrifying orange. The heat hit her like a physical blow. Flames licked out of the upper windows, and the sound of the fire was a hungry, roaring beast. "Legacy! Is anyone in there?" Silas Vance bellowed, his face pale with fear. Just then, a figure moved with a speed that cut through the panic. It was Caleb. He didn't hesitate. He wrapped a wet burlap sack around his head and slammed his shoulder against the heavy wooden door. The lock splintered, and the door flew inward, revealing a hellish maw of smoke and fire. "Caleb, no!" Ellie screamed, but the sound was lost. He vanished into the smoke. The next few minutes stretched into an eternity. Preston finally arrived, looking disgusted. "Honestly, Silas, this is an absolute disaster. We need to focus on the insurance claim." "Shut up, Preston," Ellie snapped, her eyes glued to the doorway. Then a dark shape stumbled out. Caleb, coughing violently, his face a mask of soot and sweat, was dragging the massive, terrified bull by a lead rope. Legacy was safe. The ranch hands cheered, but the celebration died in their throats as Caleb took 2 unsteady steps and then collapsed onto the dirt. Ellie dropped to her knees beside him, tearing the expensive lace from her gown to use as a makeshift bandage. His left arm, where he had shielded his face from a falling beam, was a mess of raw, angry burns. "Caleb, look at me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her hands, usually reserved for signing checks, were now covered in his blood and soot. Preston stood over them, hands on his hips. "Well, he saved the asset. Good work, Thorne. Now, Ilara, get up. We have guests to attend to." "He just risked his life, Preston. He's hurt." "He's a hired hand, Ilara. That's what he's paid for," Preston replied, his tone dismissive. Silas Vance strode over. He looked at the bull, then at Caleb, then back at the bull. Get him to the bunkhouse, boys. Doc Miller will look at him in the morning. Good work, Thorne. You saved us. He turned to Ellie. Ilara, your fiancé is right. Go back inside. This spectacle is over. Ellie ignored them both. She helped the other hands carry Caleb to the bunkhouse. Later, after the doctor had left, Ellie slipped away from the main house. She found Caleb lying on his cot, the air smelling of antiseptic and wood smoke. He was awake, his dark eyes watching her. You shouldn't be here, Miss Vance, he rasped. Don't call me that, she said, pulling a chair closer. You could have died. It's my job, he said, a flicker of pain crossing his face. No, your job is to manage the cattle. You showed me what a real man looks like. His eyes narrowed. You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Vance. You're engaged to a powerful man, and I'm just the hired help. Stay away from the bunkhouse. Stay away from me. It'll ruin everything you've worked for. I haven't worked for any of this, she whispered. I'm trapped, and maybe I don't care about being ruined. The air between them was charged, thick with unspoken desire. Caleb's jaw tightened, his eyes a battleground of restraint and longing. Go, he commanded, his voice a low growl, before I forget who you are. Ellie rose, her body humming with a reckless energy. The fire in the barn was out, but a new, far more dangerous fire had just been lit. Part 2, The Secret Rendezvous. The fire had been extinguished, but the heat between Ilara Vance and Caleb Thorne refused to cool. Ellie could no longer stomach the pretense of normalcy. Preston, oblivious in his self-absorption, spent the days before the wedding finalizing contracts. Ellie began to manufacture reasons to be near Caleb. She found him directing the crew, his arm still bandaged, with an innate authority. The inventory logs for the feed silo are a mess, Caleb, she announced one afternoon, holding a ledger she had deliberately scrambled. I need your help to reconcile the numbers. Meet me by the old cottonwood tree at dusk. It's quiet there. He knew it was a lie. She knew he knew. The tension was a live wire stretched between them. Miss Vance, he said, his voice flat. I'm busy. No, she insisted, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I need your numbers, and I need them tonight. He held her gaze for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. Dusk. Don't be late. The cottonwood tree stood on the far edge of the property, overlooking the winding river. It became their sanctuary. Their first meeting was all business, a frantic attempt to justify their presence. But soon, the ledger was forgotten. My father, he's terrified, Ellie confessed. The ranch is close to foreclosure. Preston's money is the only thing keeping the bank from seizing everything. Caleb's expression was one of profound understanding. I know that look. The look of a man watching his life's work turn to dust. He picked up a river stone and skipped it across the water. I had a ranch, lost it all in a drought and a bad business deal. Now I only care about one thing, earning enough to keep my sister in that clinic. Your sister? Clara. She needs constant, expensive care. This job, the pay, the isolation, it's perfect. I can send every dime home. He looked at her, his eyes suddenly fierce. That's why I can't afford to be ruined, Ellie. Not for a moment of recklessness. The use of her nickname, Ellie, felt like a secret shared. She reached out, her hand finding his. His skin was rough, warm, and smelled faintly of leather and smoke. I'm reckless, she whispered, leaning in. I'm trapped, and I'm desperate for something real. He didn't pull away. He turned his hand, his fingers lacing with hers. The air was electric. The chasm of class and expectation suddenly felt insignificant. You're playing with fire, Ellie, he warned, his voice husky. I like the heat, she challenged. He pulled her toward him, crushing her against his chest. His kiss was demanding, honest, and utterly consuming. It tasted of the wild, of the earth, and of a hunger that had been starved for too long. When they finally broke apart, gasping, the world had shifted on its axis. We can't, Caleb breathed, his forehead resting against hers. We absolutely cannot do this again. I know, she whispered back, but we will. Their secret meetings became their lifeline. They spoke of dreams, of the land, and of the impossible future they both secretly wished for. But the world outside their bubble was closing in. Preston noticed the subtle changes in Ellie, the sudden vitality in her step, the way her eyes seemed to hold a secret light. He also noticed the guarded look in Caleb Thorne's eyes. One evening, Preston found Caleb checking the barn door. He sauntered up, his expensive boots crunching on the gravel. "Thorne," Preston said, his voice deceptively smooth, "you're a valuable asset to the Vance Ranch, and loyalty, Thorne, is everything on a ranch, especially when the owner's daughter is involved." Preston didn't make a direct accusation, but the message was a cold, sharp threat. He walked away, leaving Caleb to stare after him, his fists clenched. The next day, Silas Vance called Caleb into his office. "Thorne, you're the best foreman I've had in 20 years. You saved Legacy. I owe you, but you need to remember your place." Silas looked up, his eyes hard. "The Hayes merger is everything. Ilara is marrying Preston in 3 weeks. She is a Vance, and she has a duty. You are a hired hand. Do not, for 1 second, confuse the two." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "If you jeopardize this marriage, I will not only fire you. I will make sure you never work on a ranch again, and I will find out why you need this money so badly, and I will make sure you lose that too. Do you understand me?" Caleb stood tall, meeting the ranch owner's gaze. The threat to his sister's care was a knife to his gut. "I understand, Mr. Vance," Caleb said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I know my place." He left the office, the weight of the world settling back onto his shoulders. He had to end it, but when he saw Ellie that night, waiting for him by the river, her face alight with a love that mirrored his own, he knew he was already too far gone. Part 3. The Threat of Ruin. The final 2 weeks before the wedding were a blur of reckless passion and mounting dread. Their secret meetings became the only moments of true reality. They knew the risk, but their love had grown into a consuming, undeniable force. Preston, however, was not idle. He had hired a private investigator to dig into Caleb's past. The report confirmed Caleb's story of losing his ranch, but it also contained the damning, albeit false, evidence of an embezzlement charge, the one Caleb's former partner had fabricated. Preston didn't care about the truth. He only cared about the leverage. He now had 2 weapons, the proof of Caleb's supposed criminal past and the suspicion of their affair. He just needed the final piece of evidence. He found it late one night. He had instructed a loyal ranch hand, Jed, to keep an eye on the bunkhouse. Jed caught Ellie and Caleb in a passionate embrace in the tack room. The next morning, Preston summoned Ellie to the study. He was standing by the fireplace with a chilling surgical calm. "Ilara, my dear," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "You look tired. Perhaps you've been overworking yourself with all this ranch business." X gestured to a small table where 2 items lay side by side, a grainy photograph and a manila envelope. The photograph was a zoomed-in shot of Ellie and Caleb in the tack room, their embrace unmistakable. Ellie's blood ran cold. "I believe this is you, isn't it, Ilara?" Preston asked, picking up the photo, in a rather compromising position with the hired help. "Preston, don't insult my intelligence with excuses," he cut her off. "Now this is where it gets interesting. This is a report on Mr. Caleb Thorne. It details his past." He opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper, a copy of a police report. He read the key line aloud. "Caleb Thorne, charged with felony embezzlement and fraud. Case dismissed due to lack of cooperation from key witness, but the charges were never officially cleared from his record." "That's a lie! He was framed!" Ellie cried. "And you believed him? The truth, my dear, is irrelevant. The perception is everything. If I expose this affair and I release this report, the Hayes merger collapses. The bank calls in the loan, and the Vance Ranch is sold at auction within a month. You become the scandal that brought down a dynasty." He walked toward her. "But that's not the worst of it. Mr. Thorne is working here for his sister Clara. If he's blacklisted, if he's branded a thief and a seducer, he'll never get another job. He'll lose the money and his sister will suffer." Preston smiled, a truly evil, triumphant smile. "So here is my ultimatum, Alara. You marry me as planned in 1 week. You play the dutiful, loving wife. In return, I bury this report. I ensure Caleb Thorne keeps his job until his sister is well. Refuse, and I expose everything. You choose, Alara. Your happiness or his sister's life." Ellie stood paralyzed. The choice was no choice at all. She had to sacrifice herself. "I'll marry you, Preston," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "But you will never touch me, and you will keep your word about Caleb." "Excellent," Preston said. "Now, you need to break it off with the foreman, and you need to make it stick. He needs to believe you chose me." Ellie found Caleb by the river that evening, the place of their joy, now the site of her execution. He saw the look in her eyes and knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. "Ellie, what is it?" he asked, rushing to her side. She took a deep, shaky breath, steeling herself. "It's over, Cal," she said, her voice flat. He stared at her, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about? Over? We just said we loved each other." "I made a mistake," she said, forcing the words out. "I got caught up in the drama. But I've had time to think. I'm a Vance, Cal. I belong in the main house. Preston is offering me a future, a secure life, and the power to save my family. You're offering me a life on the run, a constant struggle." She looked him straight in the eye, letting the lie burn through her soul. "I'm choosing Preston. I'm choosing the money. You were a distraction, Cal. Nothing more." The pain in his eyes was a physical blow. His face crumpled slightly. "You don't mean that," he said, his voice barely a rasp. "Tell me you don't love me." She turned away. "Go, Cal. Just go. I never want to see you again." She heard the crunch of his boots on the gravel as he walked away, the sound echoing the final devastating crack of her own heart. She had saved him, but in doing so, she had ruined herself. Part 4. The Reckoning and Resolution. The week leading up to the wedding was a silent, agonizing torture. Ellie moved through the motions of fittings and floral arrangements like a ghost. Caleb, believing her betrayal, threw himself into his work with a grim, punishing intensity. He had packed his belongings, planning to leave the ranch the moment the wedding was over. The wedding day dawned bright and mercilessly sunny. Ellie stood before the mirror in her mother's antique lace gown, a vision of bridal perfection. Yet her eyes were hollow. Her father, Silas, entered the room, his face etched with worry. He saw the lifelessness in his daughter's eyes. "Ellie," he began, his voice rough. "Are you sure about this?" "I have to be, Father," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "It's the only way." The church bells began to toll. Caleb, unable to leave, rode to a rise on the hill where he could see the ceremony site. He needed to see her one last time. The ceremony began. Ellie walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Preston stood waiting, his expression a smug mask of victory. The minister began the solemn words. "And Alara Vance, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" Ellie looked at Preston. She saw the cold calculation in his eyes, the man who had blackmailed her. She thought of Caleb, his honest hands, and the sister she was trying to save. She realized she couldn't save anyone by destroying herself. She took a deep breath. "No," she said, her voice trembling at first, then gaining strength. "No, I don't." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Preston's face went from smug to thunderous. "What did you say?" he hissed. "I said no," Ellie repeated, looking directly at her father. "I cannot marry this man." "This is absurd, Alara. You will ruin us," Preston roared, dropping his polite facade. "You will lose this ranch." "The ranch is already ruined, Preston," Ellie shot back. "And you are the one who intends to finish it. You blackmailed me. You threatened to destroy the only man who has ever truly cared about this land, or me." "She's hysterical. She's been having a sordid affair with a foreman, a common thief who was run out of his last county for embezzlement," Preston shouted to the crowd. Just then, Caleb, having seen the ceremony stop, rode down the hill and strode toward the tent. "That's a lie, Hayes," Caleb said, his voice low and dangerous. Preston laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Tell them, Thorne! Tell them about the money you stole!" Ellie stepped forward. "He didn't steal anything. He was framed, and Preston knew it. He used that false charge to blackmail me into this marriage, threatening to expose Caleb and ruin his sister's chance at treatment." Silas Vance, finally understanding the depth of the betrayal, looked at Preston with pure disgust. "Is this true, Hayes?" Silas demanded, his voice shaking with rage. Preston, cornered, dropped all pretense. "It's business, Silas. Your ranch is worthless. I was going to save you. Now, thanks to your hysterical daughter and your pathetic foreman, you're finished. The bank will foreclose by the end of the month." "Get off my land, Hayes," Silas commanded, his voice suddenly firm. "The wedding is off. The merger is dead. I'd rather lose this ranch with my honor intact than save it with a snake like you." Preston stormed off. Silas turned to Caleb. "Thorne, I owe you an apology and a debt. You saved my bull, and you saved my daughter from a terrible mistake." He looked at Ellie. "I was wrong, Alara. I was so focused on the legacy I forgot about your life." "It's okay, Father," Ellie said, taking his hand. "It's not okay," Silas insisted. "Preston was right about one thing. We're finished. The bank is coming." Caleb stepped forward, his gaze meeting Ellie's. "Not finished, Mr. Vance," Caleb said, pulling a worn leather notebook from his pocket. "Just starting over." He opened the notebook, revealing pages filled with meticulous notes. "I've been working on this for months. Your ranch isn't worthless. It's just managed wrong. I've developed a plan for a sustainable rotational grazing system. It will restore the soil, increase the yield, and cut our feed costs by half. It's a viable business plan, Mr. Vance, and I've already secured a small private loan from a contact I trust, enough to cover Clara's treatment for the next year, and enough to buy us some time." Ellie stared at him, her heart swelling with love and admiration. Silas took the notebook, his eyes scanning the detailed pages. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "A rotational grazing system. Thorne, you're a genius." He looked up, his eyes shining. "If this works, we can save the ranch, but it'll take everything we have. Hard work, long hours, and no guarantee." "I'm ready for the hard work, Father," Ellie said, stepping to Caleb's side. Silas looked at the two of them, standing shoulder to shoulder, their hands instinctively finding each other. He saw the fire in their eyes, the shared purpose, the deep, abiding love. "Then I guess I'm ready too," Silas said, a new lightness in his voice. He extended his hand to Caleb. "Welcome to the family, son. Now, let's get to work." Caleb shook his hand, his eyes never leaving Ellie's. The forbidden love was forbidden no more. He turned to her, his hands cupping her face. "You didn't choose the money, Ellie. You chose the truth, and you chose me." "Always you, Cal," she whispered. He kissed her then, a kiss that was a promise of sunrises and hard labor, of shared dreams, and a future built on honest ground. It was a kiss that tasted of dust and hope, a love story finally free to begin on the wide, open plains of the Vance Ranch. The sun, now high in the Montana sky, cast long shadows across the valley, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a testament to the work that lay ahead. Ellie leaned into Caleb, her head resting against his shoulder, watching her father stride off toward the barn. The weight of his old life lifted. The ranch was saved, not by a financial merger, but by the honest sweat and ingenuity of the man beside her. Their love, once a secret that threatened to ruin everything, was now the very foundation upon which their future would be built. It wouldn't be easy, the work would be hard, the challenges immense, but as Caleb's arm tightened around her, pulling her close, she knew they would face it all together. The forbidden fire had forged something unbreakable, a love as vast and enduring as the Montana sky itself. They were home, and finally, they were free.